Morning. In our Old Testament lesson today, Isaiah is talking about fasting, though not as intermittent fasting to lose weight, and not in the sense of the fasting you do on the night before your colonoscopy, but a great image for Sunday morning, isn't it? But fasting as spiritual practice, as prayer. Every major religious tradition in the world has an element of fasting in it as an act of devotion, as an act of contrition, as an act of communicating with God. Judaism did and does have fasting as part of its spiritual practice. Christianity has and does have elements of fasting in it. For a long time, and really only up to just a couple hundred years ago, it was normal for Christians across the board to fast every Wednesday and every Friday. In fact, in the 1800s in England, when the movement called Methodism, which would eventually become the Methodist Church, arose out of the Church of England. Part of its critique of the Church of England at the time was that the Anglicans were only fasting on Fridays, but they weren't fasting on Wednesdays. I know none of you would consider leaving Wednesday out of your fasting routine. Nevertheless, I, on occasion, do practice fasting as an act of prayer. I mostly do it in the season of Lent, which is coming up. I have to say, and I've talked to a couple other people who I know fast as prayer. First of all, fasting, you can't really think of anything else on a day when you're fasting. Like, you just constantly think of how hungry I am. I don't know, maybe if you do it every Wednesday and Friday, you kind of get used to it, but not being used to it, it's all you think about until you can eat again. And then my other experience is when I'm done fasting, this is a confession, I feel like a spiritual superhero. Like, I feel like my halo is like, wow, it's gotten really hefty today. Like, wow, I am killing the spiritual life. I mean, just amazing. And I think those are kind of universal experiences, and there's certainly the experience that Isaiah has when he's speaking to his people about fasting. Now, they were fasting, they were practicing fasting, and he's talking about how great they would feel about themselves fasting. Part of what he says is such the fast that I choose a day to humble oneself? Is it to bow down the head like a bulrush and to lie in sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? And I think most of them, and maybe even most of us, would say, yeah, that sounds right. Humility, bowing the head down. Yeah, we think that God, acceptable to God. God probably makes us out to be spiritual superheroes. Yes. And then Isaiah rips the rug out from underneath of them and me, and perhaps you too, when God says, "Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry?" Not just abstain from eating bread, but to share the bread that you have with those who are hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house, when you see the naked, to cover them. Then your light shall break forth like the dawn. A couple verses later, he says, if you remove the yoke from among you, meaning on people who are oppressed and being held down, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil. If you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness. We have these two like thens. If you don't just fast to be a spiritual superhero, but you actually take into account the needs of those around you, then God's light will break out like the dawn. It's as if God's saying, great, I'm glad you're fasting, I'm glad you're praying, I'm glad you're doing all that, that's good, but there are people around you and among you who are in severe need. And so maybe take care of them first. In America, there are 34 million people who live in food insecure homes. 34 million out of a nation of about 340 million. Of that 34 million, 9 million of them are children. 1 out of 8 families with children in the household suffer from food insecurity. Now, what's food insecurity? That sounds like a highfalutin term. Food security sort of exists on a spectrum. It can look like people worried that food will run out, that we bought food, but we don't think it's going to last as long as it needs. It's people not being able to afford a balanced or nutritious meal. You can get a dollar value meal at McDonald's or Taco Bell, and it might fill you up, but it will not offer the nutrition that you need. It can mean in some homes meals are sized down or meals are skipped. People who experience hunger, like I'm hungry right now, but I can't eat right now because I don't have enough to make it through the day. And in some homes it even means people not eating for a whole day. Some of the causes of food insecurity: chronic health conditions or a disability. I have to say, anecdotally, when people stop by the office during the day, not members of the church, they just see church sign and they need some help, about 100% of them who present themselves looking for help have some sort of health condition or disability at the forefront. Like, I need to buy this medicine to stay alive. Can you help me with food or with rent or something else? Of course, there's the high cost of housing, especially in our area here, unemployment, underemployment, and of course, right now, inflation. Food over the last year has increased 11.4%. That's eggs are up 40%, milk is up 17%, bread is up over 16%, chicken is up almost 17%, and fruits and vegetables are up about 10%. If you were living on the edge, an almost 12% increase in your grocery bill has pushed you over that edge. Food insecurity is associated with depression, anxiety, asthma, anemia, poor oral health, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, and reduced sleep. There are over 3,000 counties in the United States, in the 50 states, and Somerset County, the county we're in right now, is the 15th wealthiest county. If you ran a race with 3,000 contestants and you came in 15th, you'd be doing pretty good, right? 15th wealthiest county out of 3,000. So you might think, well, we don't have insecurity in this county, right? No. Our food bank in Somerville, the lines get longer, not shorter. When we talk about getting food to the food bank, or we talk about food being given to the clients of the food bank, we measure it in tons. Poundage. You might think, oh, well, hunger in Somerset County, that's probably like a southern Somerset County thing. It's not really up here. There is a small food pantry. It's currently being run out of one of the churches in Bernardsville, it gives over 500 bags of food a month. A good portion of those bags go to the VA, to our veterans. They fought for our country and our freedom, and they get handed bags of food. People are hungry. Children are hungry. Veterans are hungry. The elderly are hungry. In the Old Testament, hunger is a communal issue. It's not just something that they have to deal with. It's something that we all deal with. In the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, there are a series of laws that govern farming. And some of those laws are farmers, when they go to harvest their crops, are not allowed to harvest at the edges of their fields, because the food that is grown at the edge of the fields belongs to the poor. When they harvest their fields, they are allowed to go through once. But if you ever have a home garden and you pick tomatoes and then you turn around and you missed some, there's always some hiding under leaves or something like that. The farmers, by biblical law, are not allowed to go back and pick the food that they missed. They're only allowed to go through once. The rest belongs to the poor, which is kind of mind-blowing. The farmer bought the field. The farmer bought the seed. The farmer prepared the ground. They planted the seed. They watered the seeds. They took care of weeds and pests. But the food at the edges of their field and the food after they've already gone through once, God says it doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the poor. You're probably familiar with the story of Ruth, one of the most beautiful stories in the Bible. Whither thou goest, I shall go. We read that at so many weddings. It's a beautiful verse. Perhaps it was read at your wedding, or will be. And where do we find Ruth and Naomi after they come to Israel? But they're on the edge of a field, waiting for the workers to go through the field once so they can go back in and collect the food that is theirs because they are hungry. And then Ruth talks to Boaz, and Boaz says, I'm going to get some food for you, and I'm going to take care of you so that no one hurts you. And then Ruth and Boaz, of course, get together, and they have a child named Obed, who has a child named Jesse, who has a child named David. David's great-grandmother got food on the edge of a field, because the food there belongs to the poor. Jesus, of course, continues this right on in his ministry. A huge part of his ministry is feeding people. He feeds people by the thousands with a little bit of bread and a little bit of fish. He makes sure that everyone goes away with enough. At the end of Matthew's gospel, just before we get into the Passion, where Jesus is heading to the cross, Jesus says to his people, to us, he says, when you feed the hungry, you are feeding me. He identifies himself with those in need. He says, they are them, they are me. I am them. Feed them, feed me. The Christian church, for 2,000 years, our primary thing we do and we come together and worship is we gather around a table and we share a meal together. In our faith, taking care of people who are in need and taking care of people who are hungry isn't extracurricular. It's not something we do if we happen to get around to it. It is a core spiritual practice because the poor and the hungry are in God's heart. And so as people who are seeking after God's heart, we feed those who are hungry. And so that means, for those of us who are able, we give resources. And so we perhaps buy food, right? You can bring food to church. You can sit out there in the link, the room with the windows and the glass doors, and we take it down to the food bank. You can make meatloaves for our feeding ministry in Keensburg. You can Out of St. Mark's was founded Curbing Hunger. You can literally, anytime, if you live in Somerset County, when you take your recycling bins out to the curb, you can take a bag full of non-perishables, sit it next to your can, and the recycling guys will pick that up and take it to the food bank. You don't even have to leave your driveway to get food to those who are in need. You can give resources. You can also give time. Part of giving your time is making those meatloaves, or going down to Keansburg, or volunteering at our garden, which produced over 5,000 pounds of food this past summer for local food pantries and the food bank, including the VA. Go down and pick some weeds, or throw some water, or harvest that food. We can give resources. We can give time. If you don't have resources to give food, if you don't have time to do that, then you can let other people know that these things are out there. You can let people know who are hungry that there are places that they can go. One of the most beautiful things our food bank in Somerville did in the last few years is they followed an important trend of food banks across the country, where when you come, you don't just get a bag of food handed to you, but they now have like a store set up. You get a shopping cart and you get let in, and it's like you go shopping. Like, I want a half gallon of milk, and I want this brand of rice, and this bit over here, and you go back, see all the vegetables. Some of those were grown right here in Basking Ridge by you. There's dignity to it. You're not just handed and you get what you get and you don't get upset, but you get to shop. And if you can't do any of that, then you can pray. You can pray for those who are hungry, and you can pray for those who do have the time and the resources. Now, I realize I'm giving this sermon to St. Mark's, so I'm kind of preaching to the choir. I know I'm literally preaching to a choir, but I'm biased, of course, the priest here, but I think St. Mark's generally gets a solid A in feeding ministries because of the important work that you all do. When I talk about feeding the hungry, I am preaching to the choir. You know that this is important work because you do this important work in myriad ways, in ways that someone was talking after the 8 o'clock service. I didn't even know what they did for the food bank, but they were doing it for the food bank. You all amaze me in what you do. And to you, what I would just offer up and suggest to you is that when you do what you do, to remember that what you are doing is an act of spirituality. It's not just we do this because we try to be nice people and good people, but we do this because God asks us to. It is part of our spiritual practice. Part of the Christian faith and life is getting close to the heart of God. And we can do that by coming to church. We can do that by receiving communion. We can do that by praying. And we can do that by helping those who are in need. And in fact, Isaiah says that should be at the front of the line. The first things we do. When we do what we do it because God asks us to do it. It's an act of prayer, it's an act of devotion, and it's an act of faith. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for what you will continue to do. Amen.